Welcome to Unspoken Affairs, the place where secrets are revealed. Emotions run deep, and every story pulls you into the fire of forbidden desire. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tonight's story is about love, loyalty, and the kind of temptation that changes everything. It began the night of our 10th wedding anniversary. The restaurant was glittering with candles, the kind of place Daniel loved to take me when he wanted to remind the world he could still be the attentive husband. Friends and colleagues filled the long table, laughter echoing off the walls as waiters floated around with bottles of champagne. Daniel, in his sharp black suit, was the center of attention as always, telling stories that made everyone laugh a little too loudly. I sat at his side, smiling when expected, holding his hand when eyes turned our way, but somewhere inside me there was a hollow that no amount of fine wine or sparkling diamonds could fill. And then there was Ethan, Daniel's best friend since childhood. Ethan had been part of our lives from the very beginning. He was quieter than Daniel, less flashy, his smile softer and slower to appear. But when it did, it felt like it was meant only for me. That night, across the table, I caught his gaze more than once. He didn't laugh at Daniel's jokes, not the way everyone else did. Instead, his eyes lingered on me as if he could see straight through the smile I wore like armor. Later, as the evening wound down, I slipped out onto the balcony for some air. The city stretched out below, glittering in the night, but I felt strangely small and lonely. I didn't hear him approach until he spoke. "You looked like you needed to breathe." I turned to find Ethan leaning against the doorframe, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. For a moment, we just stood there, the air between us charged with everything unspoken. He didn't move closer, didn't touch me, but something about the way he looked at me, steady, aching, as if he'd been carrying a secret for years, made my pulse stumble. It wasn't the first time. Over the years, there had been fleeting moments, his hand brushing mine when he passed me a glass, the way he lingered at the door after fixing something in the house, the way his voice softened when he asked if I was really doing okay. Daniel never noticed. Why would he? In his mind, Ethan was his brother and everything but blood, his most loyal companion. But in those tiny, stolen seconds, I had felt seen in a way my husband no longer made me feel. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, that it was only loneliness filling in the blanks. But then came the night Daniel didn't come home until dawn. The night I sat curled on the couch with my phone in my hand, wondering if my marriage had simply become a performance neither of us cared about anymore. Ethan knocked on the door then, concern in his eyes, carrying takeout because he knew I wouldn't have eaten. He sat with me quietly, letting me lean against him when I finally broke down. I don't know how long we sat like that, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder, his presence warm, solid, safe. At one point, I lifted my head and met his gaze, and the truth was there, undeniable, terrifying. He loved me. He had for a long time, but he never said it. The next morning, he was gone. Before Daniel came home, and though he continued to appear in our lives at dinners, family gatherings, and barbecues, he was different. A little more distant, a little less present. He smiled less, avoided my eyes more. I felt it every time, the way he was pulling away. The last time I saw him was at Daniel's birthday party. The house was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Ethan arrived late, standing at the edge of the crowd with that familiar, quiet calm. When I went to greet him, he hugged me briefly, his touch lingering for a second longer than it should have. His eyes met mine, filled with something that broke me, longing, regret, and an unshakable resolve. Later, in the kitchen, away from the noise, I wanted to say something, anything to bridge the chasm between us. But before I could, he spoke. "You know, I'd do anything for him. It's for both of you. But this. Whatever it is, I feel it can't exist. Not here, not now." My throat tightened, tears burning my eyes. "Ethan," but he shook his head. a sad smile tugging at his lips. "Don't, please, because if you say it out loud, I won't be able to walk away." And then he did. He walked out of the kitchen, out of the party, and, in a way, out of my life. I still see him sometimes in fragments of memory. The way he looked at me across candlelight. The quiet comfort of his presence on the darkest nights. A man who loved me with a loyalty so fierce, he chose to break his own heart rather than betray his best friend. Daniel never knew. He still doesn't. To him, Ethan is just the friend who got busy with work, who drifts in and out of our lives. Now with polite excuses. But to me, Ethan is the ghost of the love I'll never speak of. The love that walked away forever. And sometimes, late at night, when Daniel's steady breathing fills the room, I lie awake remembering what it felt like to be seen by him. To be loved in silence so deeply it almost destroyed us both. The months after Ethan walked away stretched into a haze. Daniel remained the man everyone admired, and I remained the wife who stood at his side. But something in me had shifted, cracked in ways I couldn't repair. Ethan's absence was a wound that never closed. At first I expected him to come back, to show up at our door with that quiet smile, carrying a bag of food, asking if I'd eaten. I expected to see his name light up my phone, even if it was just to ask how I was doing. But days became weeks, weeks became months, and the silence deepened. When Daniel mentioned him at dinner, offhandedly talking about a meeting they were supposed to have, or recalling that Ethan had canceled, I kept my face composed, nodding as if it meant nothing. Inside, though, was unraveling. There were nights when Daniel fell asleep beside me and I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment I'd shared with Ethan. The way his voice softened when he said my name. The way his eyes lingered, like he was memorizing me. The way he looked at me that night in the kitchen when he chose loyalty over love. I tried to convince myself that he had been right, that what we felt had no place in the world we lived in, that it was better for him to walk away. But knowing something is right doesn't make it hurt less. One evening, I ran into him by accident. I was leaving a cafe, rain soaking the sidewalks, when I saw him standing across the street, phone pressed to his ear. He hadn't changed, still that same quiet strength in the way he carried himself. The kind of presence that made you feel anchored just by being near him. He saw me at the same time, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The rain blurred the world around us, but in that instant, it felt like time had stopped. I don't know how long we stood there, staring at each other from opposite sides of the street. He gave me the faintest smile, the kind that reached his eyes but carried sadness more than joy. Then he lifted a hand in a small wave, turned, and disappeared into the crowd. I stood there soaked to the bone, trembling from more than just the cold. After that, I realized he wasn't coming back into my life, not the way I wanted him. 2. He was giving me a gift in his own painful way. By staying away, he was letting me keep my marriage intact, letting me hold on to the life I had chosen. He was protecting me even as he broke me. The years that followed blurred together. Daniel and I carried on our marriage steady on the surface, though never as warm as it once had been. People still called us the perfect couple, and I played my role so well that no one questioned it. But there was always a quiet ache beneath. It all a reminder of what I had lost before I could even truly have it. Every now and then, Ethan's name would come up. Daniel would mention him in passing, always with fondness, never suspecting the truth. I would smile, nod, change the subject. Inside, I would feel that same pull. The memory of a man who had loved me so fiercely, he chose to walk away rather than ruin me. And sometimes, when the house was quiet and Daniel was asleep, I would let myself imagine a different life. A life where Ethan hadn't walked away. A life where I had been brave enough, or foolish enough, to reach for what I truly wanted. In those moments, I felt the ghost of his touch, the echo of his presence. And it was enough to both comfort and shatter me all over again. Even now, after so many years, he lingers at the edges of my mind. The man who never confessed his love. The man I never kissed until the night I finally did. The man who left because it was the only way to protect us both. The love that walked away forever. And though I will never say it out loud, though the world will never know, a part of me will always belong to him. Time has a way of softening memories, but it never truly erases them. Years passed, and my life with Daniel carried on as if nothing had ever been fractured. We hosted dinners, celebrated anniversaries, took vacations that looked perfect in photographs. Our friends admired us, envied us even, and on the surface, I was the wife any man would be proud to have. But underneath, there was a silence that followed me everywhere, the shadow of a love I had never been allowed to claim. It was during our 10th wedding anniversary party that I felt that shadow stir again. The house was filled with laughter, glasses clinking, people congratulating us for a decade of marriage. Daniel stood beside me, his arm around my waist, beaming, as he gave a short speech about love, commitment, and partnership. Everyone cheered and I smiled, but it felt like I was wearing a mask. Then, as my eyes drifted across the crowd, I saw him, Ethan. He was standing near the back, almost hidden, holding a glass of wine. He looked older, more tired, but no less striking. His eyes met mine, and in that instant the years between us collapsed. The ache I thought I had buried came rushing back so violently I had to grip Daniel's arm just to steady myself. Ethan didn't approach. He didn't smile or wave. He simply stood there watching as if making sure I was all right. And then, before the speeches ended, he slipped out of the room as quietly as he had come. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying his face, the way his eyes had softened with something unspoken. I wondered why he came, why he left. Did he still feel what I felt? Or was it only habit, a relic of something long gone? Months later, fate forced us together again. Daniel had been promoted and insisted on hosting a small celebration, a dinner with a few close friends, including Ethan. My heart pounded when I saw him walk through the door, carrying a bottle of wine, shaking Daniel's hand with that same loyalty he had always shown. When our eyes met, I had to remind myself to breathe. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was both a comfort and a danger. Dinner passed in a blur. We sat across the table from each other, speaking little, careful to avoid too much eye contact. But when Daniel excused himself to take a phone call, Ethan and I were left in the living room, silence pressing heavy between us. He didn't move closer, didn't break the fragile distance. Instead, he whispered almost too softly for me to hear, "You look happy." It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. I lied. His jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw something flicker in his expression. Regret, maybe, or longing. But before either of us could say more, Daniel returned, clapping Ethan on the shoulder, pulling him back into conversation. That night, after everyone left, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the darkness. Daniel was upstairs humming to himself as he unpacked gifts. I should have been content. Life had given me stability, a husband who cared for me, a home that others envied. But all I could feel was the echo of Ethan's presence, the unspoken words still hanging in the air in the weeks that followed. I found myself looking for him in small ways, driving past places I thought he might go, checking Daniel's calendar for meetings that involved him, holding my breath when his name came up in conversation. And every time I did see him at dinners, at gatherings, even once by chance in a bookstore, the same war raged inside me. The need to stay loyal and the desperate ache to fall into the arms of the only man who had ever truly seen me. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where I could barely hold my composure, Ethan lingered as everyone else left. He stayed behind under the pretense of helping Daniel with something in the garage. When Daniel finally disappeared upstairs, Ethan and I stood in the entryway. The silence between us louder than any words could be. "Why do you keep doing this to me?" I whispered, my voice breaking. His eyes closed briefly, as if the question cut him open, because walking away once wasn't enough. He said quietly, because even after all these years, he stopped himself, swallowing the words, shaking his head. You're not mine to love. The weight of it broke something in me. Tears spilled before I could stop them. And for the first time in all those years, Ethan stepped closer. Not to touch me, not to take me into his arms, but just close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. He looked at me with a pain so deep it made my chest ache, then whispered, I walked away to protect you once. Don't make me regret it. And then, just like always, he left. I sank to the floor after the door closed, sobbing silently into my hands. Because no matter how much time passed, no matter how many lies I told myself about the life I had chosen, the truth remained unshakable. I belonged to my husband in name, but my heart had always belonged to his best friend. The weeks after that night were unbearable. I moved through my days as if nothing had shifted, but inside I was in pieces. Daniel carried on, oblivious, busy with his new promotion, new projects, new demands on his time. He seemed so proud of us, so confident in our life together. That only deepened my guilt. Every time I looked at him, I wondered how he couldn't see it. The way my eyes lingered when Ethan entered a room. The way my voice changed when I said his name. The way my silence gave away the things I could never confess. Ethan, for his part, seemed to make himself scarce. At dinners, he would sit farther from me. At gatherings, he would slip away early. If he caught me looking, he turned his head quickly, as though reminding himself that what burned between us was dangerous, forbidden, untouchable. And yet, the more he pulled back, the more I found myself reaching for scraps of him, remembering the shape of his hands, the gravel in his voice. The night years ago when he had confessed what? I already knew, but could never hold on to. It was late autumn when the fragile order of things began to break. Daniel had been traveling for work more than usual, leaving me in a quiet house that felt too big, too hollow. One rainy evening, after yet another phone call where Daniel hurried through his words, promising he'd be home soon, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table, trying to convince myself that the loneliness was just part of marriage. Then the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, rain dripping from his jacket, his eyes tired but intense. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the sound of the storm filling the silence. He hadn't been to the house in weeks, not since that night we stood in the entryway. I shouldn't be here, he said, his voice low. Then why are you? My own voice trembled, betraying me. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might turn and leave. But then he shook his head and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. We stood in the dim light of the hallway, close enough that I could smell the rain on his clothes, feel the heat radiating off him. I've tried to stay away, he admitted. I thought distance would help, but every time I see you, it's worse, and every time I don't, it's unbearable. My chest tightened. A sob caught in my throat. Do you think it's easier for me? I whispered. You think I don't feel like I'm losing myself every time you walk away? He looked at me then with a rawness I had never seen in him before. His hands hovered at his sides as though he wanted to touch me but couldn't bring himself to cross that final line. You're his, he said, the words sharp, as if he was reminding himself more than me. You've always been his. I shook my head, tears spilling before I could stop them. Not all of me. That broke him. He closed the distance, his hands finally finding my face, his lips crashing into mine, with years of repressed longing. The kiss was desperate, reckless, filled with everything we had denied ourselves for so long. My hands clung to him as if I were drowning, and he was the only air left in the world. When we finally broke apart, breathless reality crashed back around us. He pulled away first, running a hand through his soaked hair, his chest rising and falling rapidly. This can't happen, he said, his voice breaking, but it already has. I whispered. He looked at me as though memorizing me, his eyes glassy with pain. Then he turned, opened the door, and walked back into the storm without another word. I stood frozen in the hallway, shaking, every nerve in my body still alive with his touch. I knew he was right. I knew what we had done was dangerous, unforgivable. But I also knew that whatever wall we had built over the years,